Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. We've got a really full episode tonight, but before I jump into it, I'd love to hear from you guys. What stories are you currently following? And will you be participating this weekend for any protests? Will you be showing up in Ottawa for the Trucker Freedom Convoy? Again, I'd love to hear what you guys are planning this weekend. Let me know in that comment section. But like I said, we've got a lot to cover. So essentially, I've got a couple videos I want to play for you guys first. Then we'll get into some trucker updates because, hey, there's a lot going on in regards to the Freedom Convoy. It feels like every single day there's new headlines. So we're going to be talking about GiveSendGo, the funds around GiveSendGo. We're also going to be talking about the Honk Honk HODL, which is the Bitcoin fundraiser, which they've absolutely been crushing it on Tallycoin in that regards. Then we're also going to segue into a bunch of other stories. So again, I've got a full course of blue, red, black, clown, and white pills for you guys. So there's a lot to cover. And let's start off with Jon Stewart. And so you guys may remember Jon Stewart from, The Daily Show, but I think more recently we remember him for essentially putting Stephen Colbert in an awkward position when he went on Stephen Colbert's show and essentially started talking about the Wuhan lab leak. And if you guys haven't seen that clip, I really encourage you, go watch it. And you can just see how uncomfortable Stephen Colbert is. And what's crazy to me is I remember when Stephen Colbert used to actually be funny, and maybe he was never edgy, but he certainly wasn't so mainstream that the only thing he was good for was dancing with needles and telling you to get vaccinated. But anyways, Jon Stewart came out recently defending Joe Rogan over the COVID vaccine misinformation. I think this is really important. One, I think it's important for a multitude of reasons, but number one, it seems like when Jon Stewart went on Stephen Colbert and started talking about the Wuhan lab leak, all of a sudden it became socially acceptable to start talking about that in public, which again, we shouldn't have to wait for Jon Stewart to give us his blessing, but here we are. And then secondly, I think he just makes some very valid points and reminds us of some of the other times the government's lied to us. And honestly, I've thought about doing special episodes on when the government, whether it's the Canadian or American government or both governments, lied to us, but I realized that would essentially be the show that never ends. But let's listen to what Jon Stewart had to say in regards to Joe Rogan.
These are shifting sands. And I think I get concerned with, well, who gets to decide?
This wasn't the actual right clip. Oh, shit. I had a different... Oh, there we go. I originally had a different one.
In the Iraq War, I was on the side of what you would think on the mainstream is misinformation. I was promoting what they would call misinformation. But it turned out to be right years later, and the establishment media was wrong.
So this wasn't the original clip I had, but the other clip I had essentially wasn't loading. But long story short, Jon Stewart simply reminds us that back during the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction, he was a fringe minority that was speaking out in mainstream media circles about how, hey, I'm not really sure if this is the case, and really calling into question all of Bush's administration and essentially warmongering for Iraq. And years later, we now all accept that as essentially just, oh, yeah, that's actually, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Oh, yeah, Bush and his cronies, maybe they are sort of war criminals that got us into a war that we never really could justify after the fact. And all of a sudden now we're supposed to trust our government 100%. Again, I think Jon raises some really good questions there. But the next clip I want to show you guys here, it's been making the rounds on social media. This is from a Canadian Army major. I suspect that soon he's going to be a former Canadian Army major because he actually speaks out against the current regime. But I think it's really well put, very passionate. And I really appreciate him and everyone else that's speaking out, regardless of whether you've got an audience of one or an audience of millions. I really do believe this is the time to speak out. And it's important that we all, like, let's be honest, look around the room. There's no other adults than us in the room at this point in time. And freedom's never been free. There's always a cost associated with that. And the cost is standing up and speaking out and risking judgment from your peers. But I think it's now more important than ever before that we become willing to pay that price.
Good day, folks. My name is Major Stephen Chwalowski. I have served Canada in the Canadian Armed Forces for 20 plus years. I hold a first-class honors degree in political science, and I have held several Army command positions. I have an urgent message for all Canadians. For nearly 2 years, our own elected government officials have been using the bullying tactics of fear, intimidation, coercion,
Sorry, guys. I'm not sure why I'm having these.
and financial and physical violence against us to gain compliance for certain repeated medical procedures. We tell our children that bullying is wrong. We know it to be so. Yet we allow our leaders to do this to us. They have knowingly and repeatedly violated the highest laws of the land in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as other signed international human rights agreements. Canadians have been lulled into believing that the same government who suppresses your freedoms in the name of safety will one day just reward you back with your freedoms if you just comply to ever-changing rules and health orders. That, folks, is the very definition of tyranny, not democracy. Humans are inherently free. Kings and queens and government cronies can't give you your basic human rights. They are naturally yours. They can't be given, they can't be taken. They can only be suppressed. In the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Queen Elizabeth is recognizing in law our fundamental freedoms. The federal and provincial governments of Canada have chosen, through a well-planned and orchestrated set of measures, to trick and fool and scare you, the very people who elected them and pay their salaries, into complying with the suppression of our basic human rights. They have knowingly betrayed you and me under the lie of safety. This past Remembrance Day, as I stood in front of the military cenotaph in Fredericton to honor my comrades who gave their lives for others' freedom, I overheard the Premier of New Brunswick, Premier Higgs, and our Member of Parliament, Jenica Atwin, tell members of the public how special it was that these brave members of the military gave their lives for their freedom. That same freedom that these very liars and deceivers are actively working right now to suppress. I stood there, a soldier of nearly 21 years, as a senior officer in the Canadian Army, as a veteran of Afghanistan, participating in Op Medusa, the largest combat operation for Canada since the Korean War, where I watched my own brave comrades fight and get injured and die. But I also stood there as a person who hasn't taken the COVID-19 injection. The irony, so even though I serve this country, and it has been an honor to do so, an absolute honor, like many thousands of Canadians who choose body autonomy and pro-choice, I am unable to share in the same privileges now, like eating at a restaurant, going out in public to an event, or even traveling across provinces to see my child. This is happening to many others. These government traitors to freedom are suppressing the rights of the very people they claim to honor, and it made me sick to my stomach. These Canadian governments are now focused on our children. I am calling on the medical community to put an immediate halt on these children's injections until the Canadian public can receive the accurate, truthful data from these COVID injection injuries that have already occurred. The Canadian public has a right to be able to make informed medical choices, especially for their little children. To tell them repeatedly it is safe and effective and not give them that choice is a crime, and it's also genocide. The media and government must put an immediate halt to all scientific medical censorship and the silencing of health professionals who do not comply with your agenda, as well as hear from injury victims. The Canadian public has a right to hear from those in our communities and families who have been injured by this procedure. I am calling on my military and police comrades, all of you, all of us who have sworn a personal oath to protect our family, our friends, and our community, to now stand up and protect your loved ones against this government-forced medical tyranny. You chose to serve because you wanted to give back to your community. And instead, the government has turned your love for community and your loyalty against you, and you are now a weapon against the very people you love. Brothers and sisters, you can't be forever changing indiscriminate government measures which use fear and violence, and also be for your loved ones and for freedom. You have to choose. I'm asking you to choose your family and your community. This is why you serve. And this is your moment to be a hero for your loved ones. They deserve the truth. They deserve to be protected. I am also calling on all Canadians to join in solidarity together. Freedom and love for our community. Freedom to choose who you want to be, where you want to live, what you want to experience and learn, what your spirituality is and what you want to practice, who you want to love, what you want to put in your own bodies is the foundation of our democracy in Canada. We cannot let freedom die with this generation. May God forever bless the free citizens of Canada.
So again, I thought that was a really well done speech, and I appreciate him having the courage to come out and speak out and say what he believes. And one thing I just wanted to kind of add to this is I've got no doubt at this point in time that we're going to look back on these last 2 weeks, the trucker freedom convoy protests, and whether it's days from now, weeks from now, years, or even decades from now, we're going to look back on these moments and understand that this is far more important than probably a lot of people realize right now in the moment of what's going on. In my opinion, at this point in time, it's hard for me to not view this as either one of two paths. We're either going to look back on this as a skirmish towards freedom, or we're going to look on this as the battle for freedom. And what I mean by that is essentially, if we look back on this as a skirmish, that means that not enough of us will have stood up and spoken out at this moment in time when the opportunity was right to do so. And it's always been right for the last 2 years, but there's now starts to really feel like there's groundswell and common knowledge amongst everyone else, as I often talk about with game theory dictating in order to really get the movement going. But if we look back on this as a skirmish, that means that this battle is going to drag on for years and years for us fighting for our freedom. It's never going to be easier than it is today to stand up and speak out against what's going on and essentially make your voice heard. The other option is that we look back on this as one of the battles for freedom, which means that enough of us will have stood up, will have spoken out, will have made our voices heard, and will have actually been able to get the politicians who are supposed to work for us to actually do what we wish, right? It's important to understand at this moment in time that those of us that are anti-mandates, those of us that don't want to see children masked in schools, that doesn't mean that the rest of you that want to continue to be masked, that want to continue to live your lives at the dictates of the government, you can still do so, right? You can continue to wear a mask till the end of your days. As far as I'm concerned, I've got no issue with that. What I've got issue with is you essentially creating a two-tiered society based upon one's individual medical choices. And this is completely unacceptable. And this is not my definition of freedom. This is not my definition of Canada. And it's just so refreshing to hear at this point in time that we're not alone in that regards. So understand, it's never going to be easier than it is today for you to stand up and speak out. And if you don't do so, it's going to become harder day by day, week by week, year by year. And right now, we're able to be truly peaceful protesters, which is fantastic and amazing. If we continue down the trajectory that we're currently on a few years from now, do you think that they're even going to allow you to have a fundraiser? Do you even think that they're ever going to entertain the idea of large protests again? There's a lot going on here, and I know that I often take you guys on some crazy journeys in regards to the blue, red, black, clown and white pill. But the whole point of this was to make it obvious to Canadians that you're not alone. And this entire freedom convoy has made it so obvious to any of us that are willing to look outside of the mainstream media, corporate press, legacy, news, all that junk. Those of us that are willing to look outside of those sources, that are willing to listen to other experts other than just the politicians who regurgitate talking points, rather than actually debating what's right and wrong. We have to understand at this moment in time that politics is actually downstream from society, right? From the culture. And a lot of us that were live and let live, that just wanted to focus on doing us, right? That believed in meritocracy. We didn't pay enough attention to the culture, and we're paying the price for that right now. It's important that we understand that politicians only react to the culture. It's not the other way around. They'd like to think that they can dictate the culture, but they only dictate what we allow them to dictate. So again, I appreciate every single Canadian that's speaking out. I appreciate all of you that are doing your part, whatever that means to you. And it's important that we keep doing it, in my opinion. Don't let the fear, don't let the pressure from the politicians cause you to collapse in on your ethics and morals. You know what's right. And again, I really appreciate all of you that are doing the right thing. So switching gears now, let's do the trucker protest updates. So this is from True North. Again, as always, link to the video description down below to everything we're going to cover tonight. I encourage you guys to do your own research, do your own deep dives. I don't want this show to be the end of your information gathering journey, but just a springboard into, gathering all the info necessary for you to make your own decisions rather than simply doing whatever the government orders you to do. I think True North is doing one of the best jobs in regards to recapping what's going on a day-by-day basis in regards to the trucker protests. So again, I encourage you guys to check it out. Next, what I want to talk about here, this is from the Toronto Star. Ford declares state of emergency in Ontario over truck blockades. And this has already been making the rounds in the news a lot. I'm certainly disappointed to see it play out this way, but I'm not surprised. And I don't think any of us should be surprised. And I don't think that this makes a difference in any way, right? if you believe in freedom, if you believe in your own personal autonomy, the threat of, in the worst case scenario now, based upon this new state of emergency and the rules they're implementing, is 1 year in prison, $100,000 in fines, right? That's nothing to make light of. But at the same time, what's your freedom worth, right? Is your freedom worth an awkward conversation with friends and family members? Is your freedom worth having that person in your life delete you off Facebook because they disagree with you supporting the truckers? Is your freedom worth going through a little bit of pain for? Because again, as I said at the start of the show, freedom's never been free and it never will be. It's always unfortunately earned, right? It's earned by holding those in power accountable, by reminding them that they work for us and not the other way around. Next, I want to just hit upon real quick, Ezra 11 had an amazing thread here, just essentially breaking down exactly what law Ford used in regards to declaring this state of emergency. And it definitely feels tenuous or questionable at best, I guess. I just want to highlight one point here. But again, I encourage you guys, go follow the entire thread. But number 9, so indictable offense is a big thing. Murder, aggravated assault, theft over $5,000, etc. It's not horn honking. It's not blocking a street. It's not jaywalking. Have the truckers committed an indictable offense? Well, none have been arrested or charged with one. And this is important to understand, that right now the government has no issues using the laws, using the rules and bending them to their will, and using them just as a blunt force instrument against the population, right? At the same time, these same politicians, these same governments want us to start a war in Ukraine to fight for Ukraine's freedom while denying us our own individual autonomy and freedoms. We truly do live in the clown timeline, in my opinion. Now from MSN News, Ontario court freezes access to donations for truckers' protests from GiveSendGo. So we saw earlier, right, we discussed this last week, that essentially GoFundMe caved in to the politicians and the Canadian government. And again, they said that they became convinced essentially that this was a violent protest, right? That the truckers were ill-intentioned, which again, we've yet to see what information or proof was presented to GoFundMe in order for them to come to that conclusion, particularly when they allowed Black Lives Matter back in 2020 to raise millions of dollars on their platform while literally burning down and looting different American city centers. And this should concern every single Canadian, even if you adamantly disagree with the truckers and their protest methods. Understand that these same powers that the government's using against the truckers today, if not repealed, if the truckers cave into them, will absolutely be used against all other types of protesters in the future. No protester will for long serve at the behest of the politicians, right? You'll eventually find yourself on the outside looking in, and that's when they'll turn these weapons against you the same way they want to turn it against the truckers right now. Now, at the same time, mad respect for GiveSendGo. This is from the Post Millennial. Breaking: GiveSendGo plans to ignore Ontario's attempted interference and pay the truckers anyway. So the Christian crowdfunding website hosting the crowdfund for the Freedom Convoy truck drivers says that it will not be following the orders of the Ontario court to freeze the crowdfund and stop the transfer of funds to the protesters. And understand what the government's done up until this point in time, right? The truckers raised $10 million on GoFundMe, and then essentially at first, they froze those assets, said if you don't ask for a refund by February 19th, it'll be given to another charity, and GoFundMe will approve that charity before the money's forwarded. Then once they had a huge backlash, they decided to automatically refund it, but they said it could take anywhere from 7 to 10 days in order for that refund to be processed. Understand that we're still within that 7 to 10 day window. The next platform, GiveSendGo, raises millions of more dollars from the truckers, or for the truckers, I should say. And essentially the government can't force them to shut down because GiveSendGo says that they have no jurisdiction over GiveSendGo. So simply, they then decide to freeze bank accounts associated with the truckers in order to make sure that they won't be able to use the money. Now, there's been a few different threads of information on this. It sounds like GiveSendGo plans on potentially dispersing the money directly in order to try and work around any of these freezes that the Canadian government may implement. This is a wild time. This is not how democracies usually act, right? This is usually what we think of when it comes to like banana republics in regards to how Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government is reacting to everything going on with the trucker protests. Next, I want to highlight, this is from Blacklock's reporter. So likens truckers to terrorists. So again, this is very concerning when we essentially have the Commons Public Safety Committee yesterday voting 11-0 to investigate crowdfunding for ideologically motivated violent extremism in Canada. Again, you can disagree with the truckers, you can disagree with their method, but to frame them as ideologically motivated violent extremists in Canada, this has serious consequences. And again, someday, regardless of where your position is, it will be used against you as well. Our criminal code has a definition of terrorism, which is an act committed in whole or in part for a political, religious, or ideological purpose, objective, or cause with the intention of intimidating the public, said McGregor. Activities recognized as criminal within this content can include significant property damage and interference or disruption of essential services, facilities, or systems, which I think any casual observer looking at Ottawa right now could probably make a link. I disagree. Everything I've seen makes the protesters, particularly in Ottawa, look 100% peaceful. As far as disrupting essential services, again, we've seen multiple times where the truckers are willing to open up single lanes at the border crossing in order to let some traffic flow. We've seen how the liaisons with the Ottawa trucker convoy protesters in downtown Ottawa have made sure the emergency routes are still open. I honestly don't even know what to say at this point in time. This is so asinine. We have never seen the use of these platforms as being a place used to facilitate money laundering or terrorist financing, said McKillop. There's always a risk, but these have not traditionally been used for these purposes. There are many other ways, probably easier ways, to launder cash or collect money for terrorist activities. Do you have any concerns, or have there been any flags raised thus far around potential sources of funding for what has been happening in Ottawa? Asked Liberal MP Talib Noor Mohammed, Vancouver, Granville. No, replied Deputy Director McKillop. So again, despite the fact that they've essentially got no real proof of any money laundering or really any terrorism that's been enacted up until this point in time, they've got no problem essentially gaslighting all of us and just acting as if, right? It literally feels like they've taken one too many like improv classes, and now they're simply just acting as if or trying to bluff their way through the entire thing. Now, this is from the National Post, and I'm proud of the truckers, says Polyev, and lambasting Justin Trudeau's response to the protest. So Conservative leadership candidate says the Prime Minister mandated truckers be vaccinated as a vindictive wedge strategy to divide Canadians. So again, overall, I've liked what I've seen coming from Pierre, but I still can't help but feel like this is only because it's politically expedient at this moment in time, and because he understands that the winds really are shifting and the people really are stepping up and speaking out in regards to what's going on in Canada. Next, from Rebel News, spirits remain high in the Ottawa convoy protest on Thursday night. Police presence remains high in the nation's capital. However, the protest remains peaceful. And the only reason I wanted to highlight this for you guys, if you were on the fence about going out and supporting the protest this weekend, if you were, questioning whether it was going to be worth your time or worth your effort, or, is it dying off? All I'm going to say is you should go and look for yourselves. Don't believe the mainstream media hype, because they've lied to us throughout this entire pandemic. They've lied to us throughout this entire protest. So why on earth would you start believing them now? Then I wanted to highlight for those of you, because a few people have been DMing me asking about Honk Honk Hodl. So again, links in the video description down below. But this is essentially the fundraiser that's using Tallycoin, that's raising Bitcoin. They've raised over 21 Bitcoins at this point in time, which is over $1 million in Canadian. Now, again, when you're dealing with things like Tallycoin or Bitcoin fundraisers, one, understand there's no undo button, right? So two, you want to really make sure you do a lot of research before giving to any of these sorts of fundraisers. There's already been other ones that were set up by scammers and trying to copy what Honk Honk Hodl was doing. Now, again, I've looked at the individuals. They're fiduciaries on this. They're all top-notch people, in my opinion. So again, I encourage you guys, go do your own due diligence before you decide to donate. But if you are interested in donating and you're not sure how to do it, there's a great article here. And this was a Medium post essentially from Bull Bitcoin. So how to donate to the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa with Bull Bitcoin. So it's not over. It's only the beginning. Individual liberty, sovereignty, and dignity are fundamental values that the Bull Bitcoin team strongly believe in. In addition, many of our staff have personally suffered from Canada's medical tyranny, have exiled themselves to other countries in order to live a life resembling normalcy, and have been banned from returning from our homeland unless we comply with Canada's unconstitutional and immoral vaccine mandates. It is thus natural for Bill Bitcoin to support the Canadian Trucker Freedom Convoy. So again, they've got a step-by-step process that breaks down for you exactly how you can participate. And essentially, Bull Bitcoin uses like a coin joiner, so it should help ensure that you're anonymous in case you're concerned that someday the government may want to penalize those that decide to support the truckers. And at this point in time, I don't think it's silly or naive or over the top to believe that. In fact, I think that that's a very prudent and reasonable course of action or assumption to make if you want to donate to the fundraisers at this point in time. Next, from Louder with Crowder. So CNN analyst, former Obama official, calls for violence and vandalism against the Canadian Freedom Convoy. And I just wanted to highlight exactly what her tweet said here. So this is Juliet Kaim. So the convoy protest applauded by right-wing media as a freedom protest is an economic and security issue now. The Ambassador Bridge link constitutes 28% of annual trade movement between U.S. and Canada. Slash the tires, empty gas tanks, arrest the drivers, and move the trucks. I would argue that this is more extreme and more violent than anything that we've heard out of any trucker up until this moment in time. And certainly more extreme and more violent than anything that we've heard out of any of the organizers or the committee for the Freedom Convoy protest that's going on in Ottawa. And again, it's just fascinating to see how comfortable blue check marks in the mainstream media are with the narrative of punishing those they disagree with. Now, this is from Tim Cass. So Senator Rand Paul says he hopes for a freedom convoy in the U.S., encourages them to clog up cities. Honestly, there's only one true Paul that owns my heart, and that's Ron Paul. But Rand Paul continues to impress me day by day. And could you guys imagine a Canadian politician having the balls to say that? Yeah, congest up our cities, demand back your freedoms, get these mandates fucking canceled, right? Even Pierre Poilievre, outside of like Max and Randy, right? I don't think that we'd see anyone else be willing to actually say those sort of things or cheer on the truckers to that extent. I just want to highlight a couple points here that Senator Paul makes. So the Kentucky senator added, civil disobedience is a time-honored tradition in our country, from slavery to civil rights, you name it. Peaceful protests clog things up, make people think about the mandates. And some of this we started, he added. We put COVID-19 mandates on truckers coming across the border from Canada, so then they put mandates on, and the truckers are annoyed. They're riding in a cab by themselves most of the time for 8-10 hour long hauls, and they just want to do what they want to do. It's their own business. And absolutely agree with Senator Paul. And again, I'd love to see more Canadian politicians start following in his in his wake, essentially, and start really speaking out against this, right? Stop pussyfooting around the subject matter. Because we've already seen a lot of those CPC members that were talking tough a week ago have completely backed off and are completely essentially removing themselves from any potential controversy. I'd much rather respect a politician that occasionally gets themselves into controversy, but at least speaks the goddamn truth and speaks honestly, versus those that are constantly just afraid of what the mainstream media might put together in a hit piece or a headline takedown. So switching though from the trucker updates, let's get into some blue pill stories. This one is just wild to me. Lifting restrictions could cause anxiety for many as unknowns persist, experts say. As provinces begin lifting COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, psychology experts expect stress and anxiety to run high among those who remain wary of letting their guard down. Well, what about those of us that you've driven crazy over the last 2 years by literally locking us in our homes, by demonizing us, right? By using divisive language, by having our prime minister literally say he doesn't want his children sitting next to us on a train or a bus. Yeah, I think that probably caused an equal or greater amount of stress. This is just, again, if you guys want to continue wearing masks and you want daddy government to govern you harder for the rest of your lives, you're free to do that. Just don't force it upon the rest of us, right? You can self-isolate until the cows come home for all I care. But Do not force that upon others, right? If you want your child to wear masks for the rest of their growing up phase, right, until they become legal adults, you do you. I might consider that child abuse, but again, I'm not going to literally step in. Well, actually, maybe I need to think this through. Depends on how forceful you are with that mask. But you should definitely not have the ability to force upon other people's children. And it's just wild to see, right? I'm not sure if you guys saw the video of the Las Vegas school, but essentially they announced to, I think, a group of like preschoolers or grade ones that mask mandates were done with. And literally these kids go wild, right? They're just losing their shit because they get to rip off their masks finally. We are truly sacrificing an entire generation of children right now. And we, including myself, should all be ashamed we let it get this far. And it's time that we speak out and stand up. CTV News, Orange Shirt Day founder does not endorse Freedom Convoy. Support. So I just want to highlight this, that when there's so much going on, this is what the mainstream media chooses to focus on, is that one of the organizers or one of the people associated with the trucker convoy essentially used the phrase "every child matters" and encouraged all the kids that decided today to walk out on their classrooms to protest mask mandates. The same mask mandates that the government of Ontario health official told us yesterday, we played the video, that, oh, yeah, even if we loosen up for everyone else, we're still going to probably force it on your kids. Kids are, again, you guys go look at the data yourself, but I have came to my personal conclusion that kids are amongst the least at risk of COVID-19 based upon the data the government and the science trademark has given to us at this point in time. So it blows my mind that this is what the CTV News chooses to focus on. And this was on the front page, right, of their website. This was above the fold on the front page, one of their top like 5 stories. This is more important than everything else going on in Canada right now. National Post, Russia could invade Ukraine any day now. This is from the White House. And so, again, just they're not going to stop until they get this war in Russia. How dare you ask them for proof? How dare you question them when they're like, oh, no, we told you Russia's liars. And you're like, well, can we see how they're lying? We just told you they're liars. You should just trust us like you trust the science, like you trust the experts, like you trust us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, like you trusted us about Kabul not falling, right? Like you trusted us that we were going to beat the Taliban in 20 years and trillions of dollars later. Oh, yeah, the Taliban's in power, arguably in as much power or greater power than they were previously. And now they're essentially being accepted on the world stage because we're forced to negotiate with them because of the quagmires our governments have created. Yeah, I think I'm kind of done trusting the government at this point in time. But you guys let me know, what's your hot take in regards to all that. This is from Routers. Canada to make changes to COVID border restrictions next week, officials. So good news here. If you're fully vaccinated, you won't have to preemptively, if you're asymptomatic or you show no symptoms, have to take a COVID-19 test. Man, I'm awash in all those freedoms now that they're giving us. But again, it is arguably a step in the right direction, but we need to understand that this doesn't end until we make sure it can never happen again. It never truly ends, at least until that's accomplished. Now, let's switch gears into some red pills. Tonight, it's probably just going to feel like they're mostly all red and black pills, but I think I've got one really good white pill. So hold on, Kitty. We're going to get there. This is from the True North. So pandemic-driven closures see business bankruptcies at 35-year high. So literally, we've got a 30-year all-time high with inflation. We've got 35-year high in regards to business bankruptcies. But yeah, we're all going to be okay. Don't worry about it. Let's just mandate harder and mask harder. Businesses experienced a sharp increase in bankruptcies in the last quarter of 2021, according to the Canada Association of Insolvency and Restructuring Professionals, CARE. Insolvencies were up by 36.8% across the board during last year's fourth quarter, marking a 35-year high. The brunt of the damage was caused by closures in the food, accommodation, and construction industries. Again, I encourage you guys, go read the entire article and get an understanding of what's going on here. But the U.S. just posted this week 7.5% inflation. And again, if you trust that number, you trust the government too much, because it's definitely going to be higher than that. But that's their stated CPI. So literally, again, using the rule of 72, understand that means we would expect prices at a 7.5% inflation rate to double every 10 years. Now, again, I understand you're thinking, hey, doesn't real estate like double every 6 months in Canada? Yeah, but that doesn't count for inflation, guys, because reasons. But yeah, 35-year high in regards to bankruptcies. This is serious shit, right? Entire businesses, families, communities are being destroyed because of these rules and mandates that are in place that arguably we don't even have a good reason for at this point in time, when we can see other jurisdictions like Sweden that declared COVID's over, like Florida that's got Florida men's out there just partying nonstop, having a good time. And yet we can also see NFL arenas with tens of thousands, upwards of 80,000 people in attendance, unmasked. And yet, like, you watch a Canadian hockey game and there's like 6 people in the crowd and they have to be masked and double vaccinated. It is wild that the government thinks that they've got us in such an echo chamber that they can just lie to us nonstop about all this bullshit. Next up, this is from Louder with Crowder. So teachers union president knows masks impede learning, supports school mask mandates anyway. So let that sink in. She literally, yeah, of course it's going to fuck up your kids, but safety first. So direct quote here, we know that masks impede learning, but we also know that masks were there for safety of, our kids, our communities, and ourselves. Yeah, except not really. The CDC kowtowed to the unions to keep masks on the kids, even though we know cloth masks do very little. And again, there's a link in the video description down below where you guys can go look at the study that's being cited here by Louder with Crowder. They just have a compulsion, a pathological need to keep masks on students, regardless of the evidence that comes out against them. And I went on a whole tirade about children and masks yesterday, so I'll save you guys from a repeat of that, but it is absolutely wrong. We should all be ashamed of ourselves for letting it get to this point, and now is the time to speak out. Now I want to highlight this red pill and just want to bring this to your attention. I think that people are overblowing this to a certain extent. So understand Joel Lightbound and Yves Robillard, they have absolutely spoken out against Trudeau, but these next two really haven't spoken out to the same extent. So I think this is an overstatement to say 4 federal Liberal MPs speak out, meanwhile silence from the Ontario Provincial PC caucus. So again, right now, these last two have really just said we need to dial back the divisive language, right? They're not calling into question any of the mandates or the general approach Trudeau's taken. They're just saying like, hey, we should all cool down a bit. So I don't want to see people getting caught up thinking that there's an absolute deterioration of the Liberal Party at this point, although we can always hope, but we're not there yet, at least. Continuing into our black pills of the day, this one's a doozy, honestly. You guys, this alone justifies getting a membership to Blacklock's Reporter to read the entire article, but I'm going to highlight a decent chunk of it for you guys because this is just, I don't know. This feels like it should be from the Beaverton or from the Babylon Bee. Nobody fired, government admits. So the Commons Public Accounts Committee yesterday determined no public health agency executive was fired for mismanaging a national stockpile of medical supplies. Records show the agency ignored warnings to prepare for an inevitable pandemic, instead threw masks away to save on warehouse leases. So we had significant lapses here, said Conservative MP Philip Lawrence. Incompetence by the agency put doctors, nurses, and other frontline workers in peril, he said. There were serious issues, said Lawrence. I believe in accountability. A 2006 Canadian pandemic influenza plan said a future pandemic was inevitable and required adequate supplies. Auditors in 2011 evaluation of the National Emergency Stockpile System again warned managers to maintain pandemic preparedness supplies equal to a 4-month supply of masks, gowns, and gloves. The agency instead closed 3 of 9 stockpile warehouses to save $900,000 a year on leasing costs and landfilled 8,839,942 masks. So they literally threw away almost 9 million masks, gowns, and other goods in the year prior to the outbreak of COVID. So literally the year before, we just threw out arguably a third of our stockpile of PPE equipment. The agency was fully funded at the time with a $675 million annual budget. So again, we hadn't even cut their budget. We hadn't forced them into this. They just took it upon themselves, which, I'll leave you guys to decide how blackpilled you want to get on this story. But were there any officials held accountable, asked MP Lawrence. Was there any type of discipline, any suspensions, any firings, any discipline of any kind for the individuals who were responsible for this oversight, and who were they? The accountability as such rests with the Public Health Agency in a cumulative way, as well as with provinces and territories, replied Dr. Kochar. So, in other words, no. Why would we hold anyone accountable? Sally Thornton, the Public Health Agency Vice President responsible for managing the stockpile, retired following 2020 testimony at the Commons Health Committee. Thornton testified she did not know how many supplies were on hand at the outbreak of the pandemic and disclosed the agency had not adapted to electronic inventory records to monitor supplies. So literally, going into the year 2020, we didn't have electronic inventory records of our PPE or healthcare supplies in case of a pandemic. So I don't want to jump to conclusions here, but if we didn't have electronic inventory records, that implies to me that we had paper records. Now, being an accountant, it just boggles my mind that in 2020 that was the case. Literally, this could have arguably been a clown pill story, I guess, guys, but I put it in as a black pill because this just highlights to me government incompetence to the extreme. Because no electronic inventory. What the fuck? Another one from Blacklock's reporter, data scoop called staggering. So remember how we all found out that the government was essentially secretly gathering our data, and then the government told us we were essentially a bunch of babies for complaining about it, and the only way we even found out was when Blacklocks, the reporters I'm sharing here, essentially broke the story because they put out a new tender asking for someone new to come and gather all the information for them. From the story now, a public health agency data scoop on millions of Canadians' cell phone users would never have been allowed under foreign laws, the Commons Ethics Committee was told yesterday. This was staggering to me, testified Anne Kevokian, former Ontario Privacy Commissioner. I had not seen anything on this scale with such a large number of individuals' mobility data being accessed without even any notice to the individual, said Kevokian. Forget about consent, but just notice. The Public Health Agency has confirmed it paid private telecom firms undisclosed sums for cell tower tracking data on millions of mobile customers to monitor compliance with lockdown orders. MPs on Tuesday voted 173 to 155 in favor of a conservative motion ordering the agency to suspend the practice. So understand, 155 MPs saw no issue with this. That should be black pill. Right there. Like, that is my definition of black pill, that even once they got their hands slapped and caught, and we found out after the fact, we've covered this in previous stories, that literally I believe it was the ethics committee asked if the government would like their opinion on it, and the government said, no, we good. We don't, or it was the privacy commission, sorry, that did it, not the ethics committee. And they're like, no, we don't need the privacy commission getting involved in this shit. Trust of government is diminishing on a daily basis, and this just leads to the further erosion of trust, said Kevokian. I am very concerned about that. Certainly, one would say you should be able to trust your government. I don't believe we're in a position to do that right now. Yeah, 100% agree with that. I'm not sure we've ever been there, but also it really says something when you've got the former privacy commissioner saying this about our own Canadian government. People say to me, you've got to give up privacy. It's not possible anymore. No, we don't give up on privacy, said Kevokian. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedoms. If you want to live in a free and open society, we have to have privacy. You never, ever give up on privacy, said Kevokian. Privacy and freedom, they go hand in hand. They are both essential. Absolutely. And again, really appreciate Blacklock's reporter for doing that. And you guys need to go support what they're doing. Continuing down the black pills here. So this is from Post Millennial. Possible Biden SCOTUS pick gave lesser sentence to rioter for deadly 2020 arson incident because George Floyd. This is honestly a wild story too. If you guys want to get black pilled on U.S. politics, I encourage you to read the whole thing. But last month, Wright sentenced Montez Terrell Lee Jr. of Rochester, New York, to 10 years in federal prison after being convicted for arson that resulted in a man's death. More than 2 months after the arson, 30-year-old Oscar Lee Stewart was found dead in the rubble. Lee set the blaze during the riots after George Floyd's death. While sentencing guidelines indicated that Lee should be incarcerated for over 200 months, a memo from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota at the time of sentencing recommended a lesser sentence, and Wright agreed. The U.S. Attorney stated that while Mr. Lee committed a crime that cost a man his life, His motives for setting the blaze should be taken into consideration at sentencing. So his motivations were literally he was angry and rioting and burned down a building. I'm not sure if that's someone I'd want on the Supreme Court, but that's just me. This is from the Epoch Times. Retired 3-star general, critical race theory leading to military failure. Again, this whole article is worth reading, but this is an important point that we all need to remember when we're talking about our military. Wars must be waged only with stone-cold pragmatism, not idealism, and fought only when critical national interests are at stake, he wrote. Hopes for changing cultures to fit our model are both elitist and naive. The failures of our campaigns in Iraq and especially in Afghanistan confirm this. Yeah, again, the fact that like you've got the U.S. Air Force focusing on getting maternity suits for fighter jet pilots. You've got critical race theory being implemented at all levels of the Army. That's not what's, you want to fight a war with Russia? I can tell you the Russian Army isn't scared about the fact that you've got maternity outfits for fighter pilots or that you've got CRT being taught to all levels of your army. I don't think it's going to make Putin shake in his boots, but maybe that's just me. This is from the Washington Post. This arguably could be a clown pill, but I'm classifying it as a black pill still. Senator CIA has secret program that collects American data. I just want to be honest. If this is news to you, if you're shocked that the CIA has a secret program that collects Americans' data, you might be retarded. So I'm just going to leave that there and we'll keep rolling. Another black pill here. And I guess I'll start this off with, are you guys AIDS pilled? I'll leave you on your own deep dive on that stuff, but I'm starting to become AIDS pilled. So again, you guys let me know your thoughts, but new HIV variant discovered may be more infectious and severe. This is from Healthline. It involves the Netherlands. About 109 people so far have tested for this new VB variant of HIV. I encourage you guys go do your own research and maybe go look at Kennedy's book and even just type in the word to you're going to want to use DuckDuckGo for this, but AIDS pilled. Moving on, though, let's do some clown pills to get that terrible taste out of our mouth. This is from Louder with Crowder. Middle schoolers asked to make pizza as a metaphor for sexual preferences. Superintendent, it was a mistake. So essentially, they were using make your own pizza as a metaphor for sexual consent and sexual preferences. This is where we're at. Again, you know what? If you need to make metaphors with pizza to have these discussions with grade 8s, maybe they're not ready for those conversations, or maybe you're not ready to have those conversations with grade 8s. But this is a real doozy of a clown pill. If you guys haven't watched this entire video, you need to go watch it. Jordan Peterson sort of teased it when he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, but your hamburger comes with a dose of misogyny. Watch the wokest, most unhinged rant ever. So about 2 weeks ago, Dr. Jordan Peterson was on the Joe Rogan Experience, the same podcast that has the mainstream media shaking in their boots. During that interview, he briefly spoke about who he described as the most woke activist of all time. It's worth giving that clip a second look just for a moment. So I'll skip the Peterson clip and I'll just play part of this for you guys. I don't want us to lose too many brain cells, so I'm not going to play the entire thing, I don't think, but let's get started.
I believe we should move beyond all meat. The assumption that the best protein comes from corpses is a racist belief. How do you know the animal would have picked you to feed off their corpse? 21st century animal eating requires our complicity in a new colonialism. These events especially affect girls and young women. Your hamburger comes with a dose of misogyny. Popular culture is flooded with references to sexy cows, sexy pigs, sexy chickens, sexy fishes, who all just want to have fun. Meat eating is also one of the ways gender-based structures of oppression are perpetuated. Masculinity, a construct of the gender binary facing constant destabilization, feels always under threat, and eating animals is its protection racket. White supremacists weaponized it, eating meat, eggs, and dairy, and the baiting of liberal men as so-called soy boys are all part of the neo-Nazi messaging.
All right, we'll leave it there because you guys probably want a few brain cells going into this weekend. But the fact that she even thinks that someone will buy into this narrative or argument should tell you about where our culture's at. And when I talk about a cultural civil war, this is the bullshit I'm talking about. This is why those of us that were live and let live need to start standing up and speaking out against this silliness. Again, I was vegan for over 3 years. I think that if someone wants to be vegan, that's wonderful. You do you. But these arguments would have made me cringe when I was vegan, and it's just wild that that she can even say those things with a straight face. She either deserves an Oscar or she deserves to be in a mental asylum, in my humble opinion. But let's move on. Another clown pill here for you guys. True North. Ongoing COVID restrictions add into 63,000 tons of plastic gear in landfills. So I just can't wait until once we get hopefully through the COVID narrative, when they force us to lock down because the planet's dying because of all the plastic in the oceans. And it's going to turn out a decent chunk of that plastic is going to be because of these masks and PPE equipment. But again, links to all these stories in the video description down below. Let's switch out of that though, and we're going to get into a couple white pills here. First one is Manitoba follows Saskatchewan, Alberta in lifting mask mandates and vaccine passports. So it is nice to see that at least the prairies are beginning to open up. And thankfully, I'm a short 5-hour drive from Winnipeg. So worst case scenario, maybe I can taste some freedom sooner than later. The Manitoba government plans to lift its COVID-19 restrictions by mid-March, easing them in stages starting next week. Premier Heather Stefanson said Friday. On March 1st, people will no longer need to show proof of vaccination to enter public venues. Indoor mask requirements and all other restrictions are to end on March 15th, with the possible exception of masks use in long-term care homes. So again, these are positive steps in the right direction, but I don't think that we can, we can let off the gas pedal at this point in time because, again, all of these are plans. They're their intentions. If things don't change, right? If I don't get more money from WEF or the Davos crew, then we'll pause things for a bit. We actually eventually are going to need to make sure that we actually change the rules and regulations, that we dismantle the infrastructure that's been built up. And I'm not talking about like infrastructure as in your healthcare infrastructure. I'm talking about the different, no doubt, temporary agencies that are going to become permanent agencies, the temporary administrators and department bloat and things of that nature, and make sure that all that money actually goes into our healthcare system rather than just feeding a bunch more middlemen. And then wanted to highlight this from Scott Moe. I think that Scott Moe has been doing the best job of any premier up until this point in time. I don't even think it's close in regards to a second place, but I'd love to get your guys' thoughts and feedback. Those of you that are in Saskatchewan, I know you still got your beefs with him, but I do believe he's being the most authentic of the premiers that we've dealt with. Honestly, probably of the politicians, again, outside of Max and Randy, and maybe Roman. So, statement from Premier Scott Moe on Saskatchewan border protests. So, to those of you going to have to those who are going to have their voices heard at Saskatchewan border crossings, your Saskatchewan government has heard and understands your concerns. We are removing all remaining provincial COVID-19 mandates by the end of this month and have called on the federal government to release a plan doing the same. We support your right to peaceful protest and to have your voices heard. Advancing your concerns through public demonstrations and protests is an important part of our democracy. I'm asking you to exercise that right to make your voices heard without impeding the rights of others to cross the border. You know that the trucks crossing the border are driving our economy by carrying Saskatchewan goods to U.S. markets and bringing products and materials into this province that we need to run our farms, build our canola crush plants, our potash mines, our forestry mills, and every other part of our economy. The problem in the people in those trucks and other vehicles crossing the border are your fellow Canadians. They are your Saskatchewan friends and neighbors. Don't advocate for your freedoms by obstructing theirs. So have your voice heard, honk, cheer the trucks on, and stand up for what you believe. But as you stand up for your rights and freedoms, do so in the way that respects the rights and freedoms of others. Know that Saskatchewan hears you and your Saskatchewan government hears you. Let's move through this pandemic and grow this province like we know we can. So again, I don't think it's a perfect statement by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly is among the least divisive stances we've seen from premiers in Canada, and I can respect it, right? It probably would put him in a tough position to say, yeah, lock down the border for as long as possible. So give props where props are due, in my opinion. Again, not saying it's perfect. I think that we need to be suspicious of any politician until we've got essentially guarantees that this will never happen again. And we haven't got that from Saskatchewan or any other province up until this point in time. This next piece here, I want to read the conclusion, but I encourage you guys to read the entire article from Spencer Fernando. Canada is becoming a defiant nation. And I thought that he did just an excellent job on this summary, so I'm literally going to read it for you. A new nation. On January 24th, 2022, I wrote about how it seemed possible that a new nation was being forged, as Canadians found a renewed willingness to speak out and stand up for our freedoms. Since then, that has increasingly been what has happened and what continues to happen. You can sense that there's no going back now. The new attitude of defiance and courage has been awakened within Canadians, and that we won't return to the supine, submissive, and meek approach that our politicians so ruthlessly took advantage of. Canada will be a different nation going forward, a nation where real debates take place, where independence of thought is paramount, where individual freedom and personal responsibility are valued, where free thinkers and independent media counter the spread of false establishment press narratives, and where those who try to impose authoritarianism will be called out and challenged by freedom-loving Canadians of all backgrounds, united in our defense of our rights and liberties. So definitely love that. Thought it was perfectly written, Spencer. And then finally, wanted to leave you guys with the meme of the day. So if more people understood central banking and the Federal Reserve, there'd be a lot more mobs, and they'd probably be orange-pilled. So again, if you don't like what you're seeing from your government, but you guys haven't started learning or researching about Bitcoin, do yourself and future you a favor by starting to learn more about Bitcoin. Because again, we've seen that the government, if they can control your money, they believe they can control you. Now, thankfully, that turns out not to always be the case, but they're doing their damnedest to try and make it the facts on the ground. So not only do we need to just have individual medical autonomy, we honestly need to start building parallel institutions. We need to start building parallel financial institutions so they can't just try and control us. With time, I have no doubt that we will see every G7, every G20 nation try and roll out a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency. With that, they will gain more control than they've ever had before over the actual money that we hold. They'll eventually try and force us into a cashless society. And with that, they believe that they'll finally have the last few strings that they need in order to turn all of us into their puppets. Bitcoin does fix this, and it's more important, it's more relevant than ever before that you guys start educating yourself on these subject matters. Again, really appreciate those of you that are standing up, that are speaking out, that are donating, that are doing your part to help support all the protesters or that are participating in these protests. Those of you that are inclined to participate this weekend, I want to encourage you to do whatever you believe is the right thing. But for those of you that aren't sure, why not just go and take a look? I think that you'll find that it's a world of difference from what the mainstream media has been presenting you. Again, I really appreciate every single one of you guys, and also love the fact that you guys engage with me in the chat. So let's jump over to the chat real quick and see what you guys are saying. So we've got Al, Doug Ford declaring war. I mean, the state of emergency. Adam J.D. Martin in the chat. His bid on the Wuhan leak was hilarious. I assume that was Jon Stewart. Yes, agree. Al says, John has always been a man of the people. Adam saying, the power of free speech is unbelievable. I'm so scared for the censorship bill trying to push its way through Canada. So bad. Yes, absolutely agree. And as we heard from literally the privacy commissioner in the Blacklocks reporter article, she hits upon how privacy is absolutely fundamental to any sort of freedom. And again, if we allow them to pass these new bills and continue to censor us further, if they continue to encroach and grow the definition of what hate speech is, if they continue to frame truly peaceful protesters as violent extremists, I mean, we're no longer on a slippery slope. We're just in a free fall at that point in time, in my opinion. Al says they're trying to reproduce the Chinese socially controlled society. They all salivate at the mouth of what China created in their own borders. Absolutely agree. If you guys people used to talk about how we were going to end up with a social credit system, but I think we're starting to see now that, we actually have already kind of a backdoor social credit system where if the government doesn't like your protest, they're just going to shut down your funding. If they can't shut down the funding, they're just going to freeze your bank accounts. If they can't freeze your bank accounts, well, I don't know. We're about to find out what happens next. They declare states of emergency, it seems like. Al says, I loved this part of the speech, calling upon soldiers and law enforcement to stand up and speak out. Yeah, I agree 100% with that, Al. We've got Hogan here. When the kids, younger folks, and the seniors wake up and all this together like they have, and all come together like they have, it's all over. Have had enough. No more mandates. 100% agree. X says, you clearly haven't been to a country that actually is led by a dictator, eh? Well, I've been to Cuba for my all-inclusive resort trip, but I don't need to actually physically be in a dictatorship to understand one, right? I've studied history. I've studied what happened in Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia and communist Romania, communist Hungary. Like, it's just littered with despots, right? Canadian or human history. And if you don't understand that it doesn't happen overnight, but it's a slow, gradual increase in control by the elites, by those in power, by the politicians, whoever happens to try and essentially seize power, then you've completely missed the plot of all Canadian history. Again, Rome started out as a republic. Hogan, already read that one. Graham, GiveSendGo statement indicated the funds will be distributed to the indented receipt, a newly registered nonprofit incorporated in the U.S. under control of Convoy organizers. Gotcha, appreciate that. Al says Rand Paul equals political rock star. Definitely agree. Again, I think him and like Ted Cruz, they sometimes focus on a little bit more grandstanding than it's necessary, but I mean, at least they're speaking out, and particularly Rand Paul. Tara says business closures and bankruptcies at an all-time high. Sounds like everything is going according to their plan. Klaus must be so proud. Yep. JJ Clem, police give Windsor border protesters warning that all vehicles must be removed by 7 p.m. Appreciate you sharing that, JJ. And again, as we've seen in the past, there's been previous kind of threats from the government. Again, for each of you, it's an individual decision to decide what level of risk you're willing to accept. But as I said at the start of this show, I truly believe it's not going to become easier to fight for our freedoms. It will only become harder. If we don't win this time, the next time is going to be harder to win. And it will take more sacrifices and a higher cost. And again, that's why I don't want to see ourselves in a dictatorship, Mr. X commenter. Tara Bell, sadly, CRT divisive garbage isn't just being taught in schools. It's being shoved down throats of people at work disguised as diversity and inclusion, and is all about white man bad. It definitely feels that way. And certainly when you get into the real praxis behind it, yeah, there's so much like the idea that you have to get up in front of a group and admit your privilege or apologize to people. Again, the idea that you simply have to apologize to people because of your race or their race, that's starting to get into creeping into racism, I would argue, because you're literally just viewing people through the lens of their race rather than through the lens of their accomplishments, their deeds, their actions, right? Tara says, yes, they love to blah, blah, blah about climate and conveniently never address all the face diapers that are all over the ground everywhere at beaches, in the water. And I'm sure sea life has been choking on them for the last 2 years. Benjamin says, we are at the point of no return. We have to stay strong at this point. I agree with you, Benjamin. Nick says, they can't freeze GiveSendGo. It's an American company. Yep, we covered that briefly there. Nick says, cashless society. Okay, I'll steal everything then. Laugh out loud. Well, yeah, you'll just have to move to San Francisco and make sure each individual theft is under $900 and you'll be safe then, Nick. But I'm sure we'll eventually see Vancouver or Toronto or some other woke city try and out-woke San Francisco. But right now, they definitely lead the charge in that regards. Rosalia says, 100% agree with you, Matt. Appreciate it. And then Al says, Tara is absolutely right. CRT is heavily pushed within corporate organizations. Absolutely. And again, that's where it's important that we speak out, that we stand up, because these culture wars aren't just going to disappear if we ignore them. And again, understanding that culture is actually upstream of politics. Politicians just react to what they think is going to get them more money, keep them in power, get them more power. They are the parasite class. I don't know any other way to frame it, right? There may be a handful of individuals that accidentally sneak into that class of humans that actually do have good intentions and somehow manage to keep their soul. But understand, they are so few and so far between that I think that our default position should always be to never trust a politician until we can trust and verify everything that they've said. And they've got a long history, like, I don't know, decades of history, like Ron Paul did. At that point in time, maybe we can start to give them the benefit of the doubt. But outside of that, we should always be suspicious of those that would like to be in power over others. Again, appreciate those of you guys that are engaging with the content, those of you that hit the like button, those that have subscribed, those of you sharing this on social media, because again, big tech is going to do us no favors in regards to the algorithm. But like I said, I don't need to go viral. All I need to do essentially is know that I'm not alone and let you guys know that you're not alone. We're not crazy. It's okay to want to make your own medical decisions. It's okay to want to be free. It's okay to want to live in a meritocracy, right? It's okay to want to live in a world where there is risk, but with that risk comes the opportunity of reward. If you just want to be an asset of the state, feel free and go be an asset of the state. But I think we've seen, based upon that Blacklock's reporter article from earlier today, that what the government does with its assets. Oh, they're going to decide to save on storage fees and just maybe throw you out when you're no longer useful or when you no longer fit their narrative. So again, appreciate you guys. We'll see you. We'll be back on Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And a reminder, if you haven't joined the Problems or Profits Discord, if you want to be in a community of like-minded individuals, I think that's one of the best communities for Canadians. So link in the video description down below. We've got a separate channel in that Discord called Maple Pill. I know for a lot of you, you're probably like, oh, another app, another platform I need to get on. Yeah, you kind of do need to get on it because it's way less censor, or it's way more censor resistant, right? On YouTube, on Facebook, your comments are going to get blocked and deleted. Someday I'm going to disappear off of those platforms. I've got no doubt behind it. So again, if you guys hate having to watch me on Facebook or YouTube, reminder, I do upload the replays of these videos on BitChute and Rumble. Maybe I'll spend some time this weekend and figure out how I can live stream concurrently to those platforms. Any of you guys that are like StreamYard wizards that know how I can do that, through StreamYard, or do my StreamYard and then also somehow do it on Rumble concurrently through OBS and Voicemeeter, let me know, because it turns out this stuff isn't just like that. It actually takes a little bit of work. But again, appreciate you guys. We'll see you Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I appreciate every single one of you that decide to go out this weekend and protest. Thanks, guys. See you then. Cheers.